Well, as a dramaturg, I think that going virtual has mostly had me reevaluating the rehearsal process and the dramaturg's role in the rehearsal room. It's been a challenge because, of course, the actors need their space, and it's been harder for me to hop on and observe and be a regular presence in the rehearsal room. However, what it has allowed for is more behind the scenes communication in regards to folks sending me questions, me supplying research materials to the actors, and also I'm taking advantage of some of the virtual um, tools, resources in Zoom as part of the presentation process. And also thinking too that since we're not necessarily limited by physical space, the kinds of resources that I can bring together for folks and the kind of things that I can share. Bonnets, the way I describe it, is posing an answer to the question of why good people do bad things, and more importantly, and more to the point, how the patriarchy and the double standards in society are driving us all insane. And that is really a very issue oriented thing that I think a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals are doing some really important activism and some important scholarship and discussion around that exact topic. When it comes to the dynamics around gender and sexuality and representation, when it comes to race and representation, when it comes to just those expectations and how we interact with each other. Also, especially with class too, and the double standards that exist there between different social classes and the things that different folks are expected to handle. And as part of the live production, I would have really loved to create more resources and more experiences around those conversations and really brought in more folks that could speak to that and really answer those questions and help the audience and the cast unpack those ideas in even greater detail. And also, more importantly, provide some resources too in regards to those issues and those topics. I think the biggest thing for me, and this has more to do with being part of a university and private theater department, but as a dramaturg, our work is so based on research that having access to all the different databases and libraries and resources on campus, um, and as an IU student, has been an incredible resource for the research process. And I've been able to find a lot more in depth, a lot more intensive resources than I usually can as a production dramaturg. In regards to virtual tools, I think it's been really cool to like really maximize Zoom and really get into like screen sharing and pulling up different video clips and sharing it that way and really using all those presentation resources. It's also been a really great experience in production meetings and in some of the rehearsals, just hearing how the designers as across the board and across the different disciplines have been engaging with the cast and crew and making, and having those conversations and making the adjustments they need to make and finding resources that can accomplish, if not the same thing, something similar to what would have been in a live performance, or even addressing an issue that comes up in the virtual world that they wouldn't necessarily have to have dealt with otherwise. So one of the biggest things I've learned throughout working on bonnets and going through this research process, part of moving to the virtual world and doing things on a shorter timeline has meant that the research process and the questions that have come up have been even more organic than normal. And it's also been a great opportunity to really dive deep and go along for the ride with the cast and crew instead of just creating that original packet, and just how things have evolved from that initial research back in the early stages last spring in regards to going more in depth into the historical periods about race and identity and gender and sexuality, going more, answering different questions that have come up from the actor, looking into, once we make casting decisions, the representation of God as a Black woman and how that has roots specifically in spiritual and artistic movements from the 60s and the civil rights era. um, and 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 really getting and really getting to really getting to dive deep and just take all those different forks in the road. I think too that it's been interesting, that being in this virtual process, there has been so much focus in the programming around the show and in creating the additional content and the additional experiences. The focus has shifted so radically to the designers that was a new experience for me, and that was something that was really interesting to engage in and that I learned a lot doing, and thinking about those elements as well and starting to ask those questions dramaturgically.